NBA champions. It's rare air, unlikely for even the best positioned of teams. In 79 seasons, less than half of the NBA's 45 franchises have managed to claim the honor. Only half of that number more than once. North Carolina, Indiana, New York, Los Angeles, historic, tradition-rich basketball markets all have teams that have never summited the NBA's highest peak. So, respectfully, how did a Larry O'Brien end up in Oklahoma City? All logic would suggest that it's not just far-fetched, but impossible. It's in the NBA's third smallest market, barely edging out New Orleans and Memphis, truly more comparable to G League markets like Greensboro and Birmingham. It's not in a desirable or lavish locale that could draw the game's biggest stars in free agency. It's not even in what would traditionally be considered a basketball-rich area to allow the team to punch above its perceived weight. Still, they're world champions. So how did they manage to triumph over such deeply ingrained disadvantages? Well, experience. Even in Oklahoma's most primordial basketball dawn, Oklahoma City was a runner-up in its own state, little brother to Guthrie, the territorial capital. In Guthrie, the first team was formed. In Guthrie, the first games were played. And in Guthrie, the first tournament was held. All at least 2 years before there's ever mention of a team playing in Oklahoma City. Guthrie owned Roundball's youth. Oklahoma City's local press scarcely even mentioned the game, more concerned with the local business happenings than with a game preferred by girls and collegians. One could hardly blame them, though. Oklahoma was the last state in the country to be legally settled by white Americans. Even in Hawaii and Alaska, not admitted to the Union until 1959, settlers preempted Oklahoma's land rush of 1889. The speed, then, at which the state was developing meant that there were much more newsworthy events happening every day all around, and their attentiveness was duly rewarded. In 1910, the citizens of Oklahoma, then officially the 46th state, voted controversially to move the state's capital from Guthrie to Oklahoma City, recognizing its growing importance commercially and culturally. While Guthrie had spent the previous decade mostly stagnant, Oklahoma City had seen a 540% increase in population, as new railroads from origins like St. Louis and Memphis began bypassing Guthrie. Further, the Oklahoma Railroad, an early streetcar system that connected Oklahoma City with nearby towns like Norman and Edmond, broadened what could be effectively considered as part of the city, making it Oklahoma's first real urban center. Still, basketball excellence was nearly as unattainable as before. Though the three major area colleges, Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, and Central Oklahoma, began fielding teams, they were more or less irrelevant. The country's best teams were in the Northeast and Midwest, where the people and players were. By 1920, only Utah and Washington State managed to tangibly assert themselves from anywhere else, even then only as flashes in the pan. The deck was stacked, especially against the Plains. They didn't have brand-name coaches. Basketball was tertiary to football and baseball. Nobody really wanted them on the schedule. Oklahoma only left the state 4 times in their first 8 seasons, preferring glorified club sport games against the local colleges, Indian, and prep schools. For Oklahoma City and Central Oklahoma, it's less clear, but surviving newspapers seem to indicate that they were likewise stationary. As the collegiate athletics model modernized through the teens and 20s, however, they were thrown a lifeline. Not OCU or Central Oklahoma, mind you. They were doomed to remain vying for local relevance as members of the Oklahoma Intercollegiate Conference, but OU, as the state's flagship institution, with a highly regarded football team in tow, were offered a position in the prestigious Missouri Valley, the predecessor to the Big Eight. Even though OU football had dabbled with the concept, playing in the Southwest Conference from 1915, this was uncharted territory for Sooner basketball. Missouri was one of the best programs in the country, Nebraska was fresh off a decade of regional domination, and Kansas had an exciting young coach named Phog Allen. It was a long, long way off Oklahoma Baptist. The early returns largely reflected that. By the time OU managed to win the conference in 1928, Kansas and Missouri had both twice been pre-tournament national champions, individually bookending a shared honor in 1922. They were simply behind, a common theme that crippled them time and again. Even at the high school level, Oklahoma City only split the 20s with El Reno and Tulsa, two cities significantly smaller than the state's capital, one of which was right in its shadow. The 1930s were going to change everything, though. Basketball was on a collision course with destiny, and the fine men of Oklahoma City, newly enriched with massive oil wealth, were going to have something to say about that. Oil wealth that lasted about 2 years. Their good fortune in 1928 allowed some locals to delay the effects of the Great Depression as skyscrapers went up and wells were drilled, but in 1930, Texas speculators discovered the East Texas oil basin, and that came to an abrupt end. Such a huge volume of new oil cratered prices all the way to 13 cents a barrel amid weakening demand, and almost instantly, they were back where they started. Back where they started was a far sight better than much of Oklahoma and the country, however. Truly only Tulsa managed to maintain some sense of normalcy due to its 2 decades as the oil capital of the world before Texas burst that bubble. That tightened Tulsa's grip on the lower ranks. Tulsa Central racked up a case full of high school state titles in the 30s, where they had the name brand that they just didn't on the regional or national levels. Make no mistake, they were working on getting there at the higher circuits, pushing for the Golden Hurricane of Tulsa to join the small conference MVC, but it was slower going. For now, Oklahoma City had them at arm's length, at any respectable standard. Unfortunately, while Oklahoma reinforced their status as a best-of-the-rest program behind Kansas in the Big Six, a new, fiercer enemy had risen over their other shoulder. His name was Henry Iba, and though he cut his teeth at Classen High School in Oklahoma City, bringing through the state's best-ever player, Jack McCracken, who you can learn more about here, he stood as the city's largest obstacle. That's because instead of remaining in Oklahoma City, his career led him to the big chair in Stillwater, where he wrote his name into basketball immortality. I don't say that lightly. He was outstanding. In 5 of his first 6 seasons at Oklahoma State, he won the MVC, twice reaching the semifinals of the NIT, and brought in the school's first All-American, Merle Rousey. And that was only the beginning. Oklahoma fully intended to escalate the basketball war. To replace their own retiring legend, Hugh McDermott, they brought in former Sooner All-American Bruce Drake, whose innovative offense promised immediate returns for a program quickly falling behind. Sure enough, they realized them. In Drake's first season at the helm, the Sooners won the Big Six, walloped Iba in an NCAA tournament play-in game, and reached the inaugural Final Four, only falling to the eventual champions from Oregon. Over Drake's first 6 seasons, the two coaches combined for 8 conference titles, 7 All-American selections, 2 NCAA berths, 2 NIT berths, and pulled basketball's center of gravity ever west. So west that the unthinkable happened. In 1945, on the back of 7-foot Goliath Bob Kurland, Henry Iba's Oklahoma State won their first ever national championship. It was a little unconventional with the World War going on. The MVC didn't even play a conference schedule. Still, it counted. Many others had that advantage, and few dared schedule so brutal a gauntlet to prepare themselves. Then, to prove it wasn't a scheduling fluke that allowed them to win it, Iba's men went out and did it again in 46. A team from Oklahoma, a state younger than the NCAA, went back-to-back, were the first to go back-to-back, or to even win a second title, and put the country to shame. Especially Oklahoma City. It would have been one thing had they been pipped by Tulsa, who could theoretically have bought a championship roster, but to be one-upped by Stillwater, by a school who voluntarily relegated itself when the MVC blew up in 28. That was wholly unacceptable. A complete failure. Speaking of Tulsa, by the way, they weren't just doing nothing with that championship money. They were actually spending it on basketball, just not at the University of Tulsa, or the collegiate level at all. They were funding elite-level amateur teams in the AAU, the sport's pinnacle after the Great Depression cratered professional basketball. In fact, all of Oklahoma was vying for relevance on that front. It had become something of a regional tug of war after the tournament moved to Kansas City in the teens, the craze spreading first to Kansas and Missouri, then to Oklahoma, Colorado, and beyond. It wouldn't be unreasonable to suggest that, though they were late comers, these states defined what AAU basketball was. In its infancy, the genuinely competitive teams were swanky sports clubs, YMCAs, and college teams, mostly filled with honest-to-God amateur players. The Central States entirely reshaped that. Basketball was a working man's game out there. Men who had to go to work after their playing days were over didn't have time to mess around with the round ball when they could be earning their keep, chasing the white picket fence American dream. Unless basketball was earning their keep. Employers very quickly realized the mutual benefits of having a competitive, company-branded AAU basketball squad filled with competitive AAU players. It was cheap advertising, cheap prestige, and a great way to lure driven and educated men to your organization. That's not to say they were cheating. AAU players did still have to be amateurs after all, but there was no rule defining just how amateur. There was nothing objectively illegal about offering a guaranteed, stable job, one which could provide for a family in exchange for playing on the basketball team. Oklahoma City had their own early adopter to this model. The Sterling Milk Team was a staple of the local AAU scene beginning in the mid-1920s, only just after it became the thing to do. And it was transformational for their business. All of their earliest advertising spent full pages assuring consumers that Sterling shelf-stable milk and cream were different from traditional refrigerated dairy, but still safe, trying desperately to buy trustworthiness for their product. Pivoting some of that outlay to basketball allowed them to do so through a much more personal medium. Instead of words and promises on paper, they had faces, people, and accomplishments the community could attach to the Sterling Milk brand. Though they never won it all, finding their ceiling with a third-place finish in 1928, they became an icon of Oklahoma City, a reminder of their existence still towering over the highway today. Once the oil men in Tulsa saw that basketball could be so transformational, it was game on. Think about Texas A&M's oil money buying Eric Dickerson a gold Trans Am, or SMU's buying Dickerson from Texas A&M. That's the kind of oil money that was floating around Tulsa in the 20s and 30s, and Mid-Continent Oil wanted to put their chips in play. They survived the Depression as well as anyone. They could offer serious jobs in the midst of a terrifying unemployment crisis, and they were preparing to launch a new brand of gasoline in 1933, Diamond DX. At the time, that was how they viewed it. Gasoline was treated like any other product, not a standardized good as it's become since the 70s. The DX brand, therefore, needed credibility. They were already paying for a relatively unsuccessful company basketball club. If not now, then when could they ever leverage that team to its fullest potential? 1933 was the time to act. Well, these kinds of things take some runway. 1932 was going to be the time to act. If they were to pour resources into this team as a marketing strategy, they needed proof of concept before the product launched. They needed a season that at least showed the team could get close. So Coach Little Bill Miller asked for only one thing: Charlie Hyatt. Hyatt was National Player of the Year at Pittsburgh in 1930, an AAU All-American with the LA Athletic Club in 1931, and often described as the greatest college player of all time. It was Miller's view that he was going to be the ultimate level raiser. And he was. In 1932, backed by Hyatt's league-leading scoring, the Diamond Oilers marched all the way to the AAU quarterfinals, providing the perfect platform from which to launch a big campaign in 33. Throwing caution to the wind, the newly minted Diamond DX Oilers added 1931 National Player of the Year Bart Carlton, an Oklahoma native and one-time star for East Central and Alva. On paper, this made them the best team in the country, huge favorites to take home top honors at the national meet in Kansas City. Nobody had the talent to match the Tulsa boys. Nor did they find it. With Hyatt's offense and Carlton's defense, the team met little resistance, rolling all the way to an AAU national title, the first major basketball honor in all of Oklahoma. Then, for good measure, they repeated the feat even more comfortably in 44. Again, Oklahoma City had been caught with its pants down. Again, this was unacceptable. They had several teams, each with varying levels of money and longevity, but none managed the local support or success of the Oilers, despite playing in the state's capital and largest city. At least they were losing to Oklahoma's second city on the AAU stage, a small consolation compared to their fortunes in the collegiate game. As always, however, they were locked in a pattern of one step forward and two steps back. Only 3 years after Tulsa got what they needed from the game, Oklahoma City found themselves on the wrong side of BARTLESVILLE, a town that only existed because of the Phillips Petroleum Company. Not just on the wrong side either, perpetually on the wrong side. When Phillips brought their basketball team, the 66ers, back for the 36-37 season, they were one of the dominant forces in national basketball straight away. Between their relaunch in 1950, the 66ers went to 12 of the 14 championship games, including in their very first season, and won 8 national titles. They fielded 18 All-Americans, 6 Olympians, won 3 American basketball leagues, 2 industrial basketball leagues. They were the envy of all basketball. Then the NBA came along. As media attention and television money flowed ever faster towards the professional game, amateurism died a slow, cold death. So too did basketball in Oklahoma City. After their championship game loss in 47, Oklahoma made just one NCAA tournament appearance over the next 35 years. Only OCU, under the leadership of coaches Doyle Parrick and Abe Lemons, stood tall, going to 6 Sweet 16s between 1950 and 70. It wasn't just Oklahoma City, though. The whole basketball culture of Oklahoma was collapsing around them. The 66ers, dead in 68. Oklahoma State, 2 tournament appearances between 55 and 70. Tulsa, useless. Directional schools, hopeless. After Lemons left OCU, the whole state may as well have been playing church league. There was no life. As the social and cultural landscape rapidly shifted while Vietnam raged, it seemed the whole game was irredeemably frozen in time. The NBA kept on growing, and nobody cast a look their way. The ABA came and went, and it too did not waste a single thought on a potential team in Oklahoma City. Nobody was coming to save them, so they would have to do it themselves. In 1980, 33 years removed from their last deep run, the Sooners called on a dry but fiery son of Oklahoma, Billy Tubbs, to resuscitate a program that had shown just the faintest signs of a rebirth under the leadership of legendary cheater Dave Bliss. Well, actually, they first called on Georgetown's John Thompson, offering to make him the country's highest-paid basketball coach, before being rudely reminded of their place in the basketball world. Still, Tubbs was some consolation prize. He recruited 4 NBA draftees to Lamar, went to the 1980 Sweet 16, and every year ran out some of the highest-scoring teams in the country. His run-and-gun, high-pressure style, Billy Ball, was seen by OU's admin as an ideal way to reinvigorate the program, if only for its entertainment value, and as a perfect complement to Barry Switzer's all-action football offense. Despite early returns being less than promising, especially considering the team's late success under Bliss, they were eventually proven correct. Tubbs had an eye for talent, and talent had an eye for Tubbs. Highly heralded David Little transferred in from Texas Tech and gave the Sooners almost 19 a game. Unknown 25-year-old JUCO player Charles Jones was the backbone of their interior defense, but they needed an X factor to get over the hump. Lucky for Coach Tubbs, one was staring them in the face. In Tulsa, Wayman Tisdale, perhaps the greatest high school player in the state's history, was rolling in national attention. All-American teams, big tournaments, NBA scouts. He was big time. But little old Oklahoma was not. Little old Oklahoma was smaller in stature than even Tulsa, who also changed coaches in 1980, hiring eventual Hall of Famer Nolan Richardson. Richardson's Golden Hurricane won the NIT in 81 and made the tournament in 82. He had a track record of success with his previously non-competitive program that Oklahoma didn't. Yet. Tubbs' whole pitch to Tisdale, along with offering him the chance to play with his brother William, who he'd cunningly brought to campus the year before, was about what came next, about writing a legacy. The 1982 USA Mr. Basketball fell for it hook, line, and sinker. It was perhaps Oklahoma City's final great victory to conquer the state. While Tisdale went on to be a 3-time consensus All-American and 3-time Big 8 Player of the Year, averaging a 25-point double-double, Tulsa failed to win even one tournament game under Richardson. Oklahoma won 5, finishing with an Elite 8 in 1985. His impact reached beyond his time at OU as well. Young stars felt confident that Tubbs could take them from highly rated prospect to NBA draft pick, as he had done with Tisdale. Stacey King, Harvey Grant, Ricky Grace, Mookie Blaylock, Tubbs loaded up on NBA hopefuls, and in turn lit up the 80s. 87-88 was the biggest of those seasons. It was Tubbs' endgame in all its glory. Running on the break and overpowering the Big 8, Oklahoma's 4 NBA players averaged over 74 points per game. They lost 3 games all year, won the Big 8 tournament, and gapped every tournament game before the Final Four by double digits. It wasn't entirely dissimilar from a Dan Hurley UConn team. You know how this story goes by now, though. In the national championship game against Big 8 rivals Kansas, Oklahoma had their crowning moment stolen away again. Danny Manning was simply too good. Tubbs won the league only once more before his departure in 1994, and Oklahoma, despite maintaining a high-level program, has never made the championship game since. It wasn't all doom and gloom. In 1990, the Continental Basketball Association, a loosely affiliated NBA development league, chartered a franchise in Oklahoma City. It was the first time in the city's history that they had a pro basketball team, if only in the minor leagues, and they were really, really good. March Madness icon Lorenzo Charles played there. Andrew Wiggins' father Mitchell spent a season on the squad. They played in an enormous arena. They even won the league title. It was a huge win. People didn't care, though. After years and years of being subjected to being second best, why would the people of Oklahoma City care about some 2-bit ball club? The late 80s and 90s saw huge expansion in the NBA. Clubs went to near-peer cities like Charlotte and Orlando, while they barely got a look. It felt like basketball's establishment was leaving them behind, just as it had done in the 1950s. But Oklahoma City's leadership was not going to sit around and take it this time. They felt that it was all a signal of the country's lack of confidence in the city's direction. The 80s wreaked financial havoc upon them. 8 of the city's 10 largest banks collapsed because of the economic downturn in the state's energy sector, and they were holding on by barely a thread. It was now or never. Faced with that reality, Mayor Ron Noreck, a second-generation mayor whose father James had been heavily involved in politics in the 1950s, championed a new project to save his beloved city. The Metropolitan Area Projects Plan, or MAPS, was a classic urban renewal initiative. It was all about revitalizing the urban center to kickstart a chain reaction in the surrounding areas. Investing in parkland, renovating the convention center, building a new main library, it was all on the table. For basketball, though, nothing was more important than the arena project. The city wanted to build an arena to the minimum possible specifications of the NBA and NHL, the 2 sports for which they had minor league teams, at the lowest possible cost, so that they could have something to lure one of the leagues if an opportunity arose. It would also be a valuable public asset, or whatever they said at the time to make the taxpayer feel better. It was for bringing a team to town. Though it took them 5 years to raise the money, 1 year to break ground, and 3 years to build it, the Ford Center, now the Paycom Center, eventually opened its doors in 2002. By that time, the Cavalry had long been dead, going bust in 1997, and the city had told various minor league franchises in no uncertain terms that it was the NBA or nothing. So in the interim, it was a cavernous place for CHL hockey and arena football. That wasn't necessarily a bad place to be. The arena not having a premier tenant meant that city leadership could be more agile and react to market opportunities in a way that pretty much nobody else could. The legwork was done. All they had to do was sit and wait. 2002, Charlotte decided on relocation. After discussions with Louisville and St. Louis, they chose New Orleans. 2003, a new expansion team was announced. It was bound for Charlotte. 2004, all quiet. 2005, disaster. On August 29th, Hurricane Katrina, then the fourth most intense hurricane in U.S. history, made landfall in Louisiana. Over the course of about 3 days, it brought biblical devastation to New Orleans. Hundreds died, hundreds of thousands were permanently displaced, and billions of dollars were washed away as one of America's cultural icons was violently ripped apart. So thorough was the destruction that the last of the flooding didn't subside until October, over a month later. It was one of the United States' greatest ever humanitarian crises. The last thing anyone wanted to think about was basketball. Still, the world carried on. It was quite evident that New Orleans was going to be a disaster area, incapable of hosting a team by the time the NBA season started. The rebuild ahead was far too daunting. Commissioner David Stern explored staying in Louisiana in partnership with LSU, but the whole state was completely tied up in the relief effort. They had to look elsewhere, at least for 2005 and possibly beyond. Cities blitzed Stern trying to be the Hornets' temporary home. Kansas City, Louisville, Nashville, and San Diego all threw their hats in the ring. None could offer the package that Oklahoma City had spent a decade putting together. Armed with a pseudo-ownership group of local businessmen, fronted by former Spurs minority investor Clay Bennett, the city could even fund a guarantee against the team's revenue in the event things went poorly. Preparation had met opportunity at last, and Oklahoma City manufactured a whole mess of their own luck. Of course, it wasn't just about leadership. For this venture to be a success, the people of Oklahoma City would need to support the team through the ups and downs, to show the league office that there was a basketball market in a non-traditional city. They took that mission very seriously. The city rallied behind the Hornets in a way they hadn't ever for basketball, eager to prove that they, as much as anyone else, deserved a place in the sport's big time. Despite finishing 10th in the West, 6 games out of the playoffs, the Oklahoma City Hornets finished 11th in attendance, only just behind the first-place Spurs and above the second-place Suns. It was so well supported, such a resounding success, that Bennett actually tried and failed to buy the team to keep them in Oklahoma City beyond 2006. He didn't fail because the other owners said no, but because George Shinn wanted to keep them in Oklahoma City himself. In a 2006 letter to Commissioner Stern, he wrote, "We need to immediately begin laying the foundation for what I believe will be great relationships in Oklahoma City. I believe there are several options that we have, none of which involve returning to New Orleans." Before the season even ended, the franchise announced plans to explore that eventuality, even if the stated goal was to return home, remaining in Oklahoma City for all but 6 games of the 06-07 season. The Hornets were printing money there far faster than they ever had back in Louisiana, so it wouldn't hurt to give it one more year to wait and see how New Orleans recovered. In the end, it really didn't matter. The franchise was again well supported, this time finishing 14th in attendance when discounting the New Orleans games, but as 2006 and 7 wore on, it became clear George Shinn couldn't bring it upon himself to abandon another city. He was a permanent pariah in his hometown for taking the Hornets to New Orleans in the first place, and had decided that he wasn't going to make the same mistake again. By then, however, George Shinn was yesterday's news. Only weeks after the Hornets' final season in Oklahoma City tipped off, the NBA Board of Governors officially ratified the sale of the Seattle Supersonics to Clay Bennett and his group of Oklahoma City businessmen. From the moment the ink dried, the Sonics and Bennett's relationship with Seattle only deteriorated. Seattle was already hostile with the old ownership at the best of times, and they were locals, desperate to keep the team in town. Bennett was an evasive out-of-towner that might ship them out in the night. And to his credit, depending on who you choose to believe, he didn't immediately go looking to do that. There was a contractual obligation to engage with the city and the state that he attempted to fulfill, but Washington lawmakers were never looking to play ball on a new arena. In April of 2007, shortly after the Hornets moved back to New Orleans, Bennett announced the Seattle Supersonics would be leaving the Pacific Northwest, and in October, he made it official. The prodigal son would return in 2008, big leagues in tow. The basketball community still had no intentions of letting Oklahoma into the big boys club. Purists were furious that 4 decades of history was being erased. Journalists and players didn't want to take the road trips to Oklahoma City. The commissioner even described them as one of the other dozen and a half. The team was nowhere near forcing the issue either. They were coming off back-to-back years deservedly selecting in the top 5 of the draft. That had left them in a great spot, however. In 2007, they drafted Rookie of the Year Kevin Durant after coming runner-up in the Greg Oden sweepstakes, and in 2008, bolstered the core further with young studs Russell Westbrook and Serge Ibaka. After a lackluster 08-09 season, they'd pick again in the top 5, selecting Arizona State guard James Harden, and from there was no looking back. In only their second season in Oklahoma City, the Thunder marched to an 8th-place finish and took Phil Jackson's top-seeded Lakers, with Kobe Bryant at the absolute peak of his powers, to 6 games in the first round. For general manager Sam Presti, that was all he needed to see. Weaving together a blossoming youth movement with defensively sound veterans like Thabo Sefolosha, Nazr Muhammad, and Kendrick Perkins, the franchise was reinvented. No longer would they be young upstarts from nowhere happy to play along. They were going to be the hunters. It all started so well, too. After Perkins entered the starting lineup, the Thunder won 13 of their last 17, claiming the 4 seed and home court in a first-round matchup against a far inferior Denver Nuggets squad, one that Durant put to the sword. Danilo Gallinari was a fine player, but the opening salvo of a Hall of Fame career was being fired directly in his direction. He stood no chance. Nor did Zebo's Grizzlies. Randolph lit Perkins up, but Memphis didn't have the ancillary firepower in the end to keep up with Oklahoma City's never-ending waves of young talent, and dropped the series in 7. The conference finals were a whole different ballgame, however. They didn't have an answer for the vastly more experienced Dallas Mavericks. Armed with a stable of steady, 10-plus year veterans, the Mavs launched 3 fourth-quarter comebacks in 5 games to take the series and send the Thunder back to Oklahoma. To get so close and come up short must have been immensely painful, but series like that are, traditionally, what molds a team into contenders. You must sow before you can reap. Who knew if or when they would ever get to reap, though? 1 month after the season ended, a long bubbling labor dispute finally spilled over with the expiry of the 2005 CBA, and owners locked out the players. Players Union Executive Director Billy Hunter went so far as to claim the entire season was in jeopardy. What would that do to a young team that was just finding its stride? Well, they were going to find out. July passed, nothing. August, nothing. September, October, still nothing. In November, it got so bad that the players dissolved the union and took the league to court for antitrust violations. Then, in December, finally, there was progress towards playing. On December 8th, the players and league reached an official agreement that would see the players reduce their slice of the revenue pie and in return get concessions on ongoing salary issues. Aggressively, the league office selected a compressed 66-game schedule. This was actually hugely beneficial to OKC. Not the lost time or the arrhythmic flow of the preseason, of course. The speed. Games were going to come quick and fast, one after another, and being so young meant that they were better equipped to handle the physical beatdown that would entail. Behind yet another Kevin Durant scoring title, the Thunder catapulted up the standings. Harden won 6th Man of the Year. Ibaka led the league in blocks. They were firing on all cylinders as a pivotal Western Conference Finals rematch loomed in the first round. This time, they didn't play with their food. Allowing no fourth-quarter comebacks, the straight sweep of Dallas was much closer to what the Thunder felt should have happened the year before. They likewise obliterated Kobe's old man Lakers, dropping only the first game in Staples Center because of his 36-point near triple-double. Even the Spurs, long the NBA's best and most veteran team, couldn't stop the spry Thunder from walking over them, uncharacteristically letting a 2-0 lead slip away in a 6-game Western Conference Finals loss. Again, though, they were reminded of their place in the world. In spite of everything they had achieved and how comfortably they'd blown through the Western Conference, LeBron and the Big Three were too much. Instead of the triumph of a much-maligned city, it was a crowning moment for the big-market super team and the game's best player. Over the next several years, the Thunder remained among the league's best, but never capitalized on their early promise, failing to advance beyond the conference finals again. Locked in a contract dispute, the team moved on from Harden in 2012. After a heartbreaking loss to the Warriors in 2016, Durant left Oklahoma City in free agency. The next 3 years, they failed to advance beyond even the first round, and thus gave up on the last of their core, Russell Westbrook, trading him to Houston. This started perhaps the most effective tank in NBA history. Between 2021 and 2023, the Thunder made 7 first-round picks, 4 in the lottery, on top of the actual players they had acquired blowing it all up. Only the processed Sixers had ever tried so thorough a demolition. By the time they were ready to turn things around, it didn't even take a warm-up year. When the team returned to the playoffs in 24, they did so as Western Conference champions before being eliminated by a once-in-a-lifetime performance from Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks. 2025 then felt inevitable. As the 2011 team had done, they learned from their disappointment. They grew from their disappointment, and they were ready to make another deep run. An unstoppable run. Shea and his group of young up-and-comers managed to do what Durant and his could not. Win a world championship. It feels good to see Oklahoma City's basketball fans rewarded. To see a city so eternally second best reach the top of the mountain after being knocked back down over and over again. Maybe all of those who came before did not toil in vain.